Sir Thomas More, 1478 to 1535, was an English lawyer, social philosopher, author, statesman, and noted resistant humanist. He was an important counsellor and advisor to Henry VIII of England, as well as holding the position of Lord Chancellor.
A noted writer, his work is seen by many as a source of motivation for various religious and political movements, such as Anabaptism, Mormonism, and even communism.
More also cultivated friendships with the most important thinkers of England and the continent, including a friendship with perhaps the greatest humanist thinker of the time, Desiderius Erasmus.
As the son of an eminent lawyer, More followed in his father's shoes. Having studied law, he gained a seat in Parliament in 1504. Soon after, he was sent on a diplomatic mission to Antwerp, Belgium, where he began writing Utopia.
Having worked his way up through government, More became Lord Chancellor of England in 1529. However, disagreements around the annulment of marriage between Henry VIII and Catherine of Aragon led to his resignation in 1530, followed by his execution in 1535 after refusing to sign the oath of the Acts of Succession.
Utopia is a fictional island created by Thomas More to act as a vehicle for his explorations into the notion of a perfect society. In essence, More realised Plato's classic blueprint of the perfect republic and brought it to his own era.
In Utopia, Thomas More stages an analysis and critique of the society at the time. He creates a fictional framework of characters and locations, allowing him to dramatise the discussion of the issues he presents.
Utopia's main concept revolves around More's critique of modern society at the time. He questions the nature of the city and society by contrasting them against the imaginary land of Utopia, an island where the notion of a perfect society free of poverty, inequality, and religious intolerance has been realised.
As a text, it is a critique of the civil, religious, economic and political state of England and wider Europe. However, More uses the form of a narrative storyline in order to cleverly tell a story.
This fictional frame allows More to dramatise a discussion of the issues he presents, and thereby explore those issues from multiple sides in order to better understand them.
However, that same fictional structure also allows More to explore issues that, in a non-fiction work of the time, would no doubt have been seen as treason or at very least heresy. It is no accident that Sir Thomas More gave his name to one of the conservative characters in the book that, to all extents and purposes, defends the status quo.
More also speaks heavily of the importance of work within society. In utopian society, every citizen has a specific job and role within the land of Utopia. There is no private ownership on Utopia, with goods being stored in warehouses and people requesting what they need. Likewise, there are also no locks on the doors of the houses, whose ownership is rotated between citizens every decade, while meals are taken in community dining halls, with the job of feeding the population being given to the differing household in turn every day.
These attitudes allude to and resemble many of the precepts found in the later communist movement, with equal ownership of the entire state as a founding principle. However, there is an evident sense of contradiction as slavery is also described by More as an important feature of utopian life and society, with every household reportedly having 2 slaves attending to the more menial everyday tasks.
More states that all citizens of Utopia must serve as labourers, with agriculture as its associated occupations holding the most important position on the island.
More presents a number of theories within the book, but amongst the most revolutionary concept, however, is seen when he describes the many significant innovations of Utopia to include many advanced and forward-thinking ideals such as a welfare state with free hospitals, euthanasia being permissible by the state, priests being allowed to marry, and divorce being permitted.
In contrast, however, he also states that premarital sex is punishable by a lifetime of enforced celibacy, while adultery is punished by enslavement. These systems would indicate a nation that didn't differ much from the European medieval society at the time, but was perhaps even more radical and unforgiving.
The The growing genre of utopia and dystopian fiction gave rise to a new architectural thinking as well as a novel concepts around the system of urban design. In this way, utopia can be seen to have indirect influences many different architectural styles, such as the Garden City movement in 1898.
As a system of urban planning initiated by Sir Ebenezer Howard in the United Kingdom, garden cities were intended to be planned, self-contained communities surrounded by green belts of parkland containing proportionate areas of residences, industry and agriculture.
Additionally, utopian design is comparable to the Roman forum layout and the classical city in general. Emphasis on free, publicly accessible space usable by any citizen as opposed to the status quo at the time, which relied upon the belief in a great chain of being, a conception of society that held each individual's social and political status as a ruling directed by God.
As a book, Utopia is divided into two distinct texts. Book 1, titled The Dialogue of Council, is a compendium of the various written correspondences sent between Thomas More and several fictional representations of people he had met on the continent throughout his travels.
Book 2, titled Discourse on Utopia, deals with detailed description of Utopia and its people. It describes the land of Utopia in response to his earlier critique of the European society, detailed in the form of discussions by the major characters of the previous book.
More places Utopia in the New World and links Raphael's travels in with Amerigo Vespucci's real-life voyages of discovery. This would indicate that More wished to distance the utopian nation as far as possible from the European continent which he critiques. Of the characters in this text, the most important is More.
Travelling to Antwerp in service to King Henry VIII of England, where he meets Peter Giles and Raphael Hythloday, the main protagonist, named More, is a fictional character sharing the same name as the text's own author, Sir Thomas More. However, More, the fictional character, should not be assumed to be a transparent mouthpiece of the opinions of the author himself.
As a friend of More, an acquaintance of Raphael Hythloday, the character of Peter Giles is in fact modelled on an actual historical figure sharing nearly all of his biographical history and bearing the same name. A friend and intellectual companion of Sir Thomas More, the true Peter Giles, helped More publish Utopia, and like the fictional More, should be understood to be a fictitious character.
A philosopher and world traveller, he lived for 5 years on the island of Utopia before returning to Europe to spread the word about the utopian's ideal society. Hythloday's last name in Greek means talker of nonsense, a clue from Sir Thomas More to his reader that the island of Utopia is a fiction.
Other characters of importance include the Cardinal John Morton, the actual Chancellor of Henry VIII, with whom Hythloday spends a fictional evening discussing the societal problems of England alongside Morton and an unnamed lawyer. The real Morton was instrumental in furthering Sir Thomas More's education at Oxford, while the unnamed lawyer is a characterisation of the defensive attitudes of certain English political classes being unwilling to find fault with anything in English society.
Finally, the character known as General Utopus is an ancient warrior and the founder of Utopia. He conquered the savages who once lived on the isthmus Utopia now occupies, and then set his armies and new subjects to work cutting the land away to make Utopia an island. In his wisdom, Utopus set up the utopian society that Hythloday finds so immensely attractive.
More's original letter to Peter Giles are on record, and as such the only evidence necessary for his argument to stand is the recorded history of the period. The utopian society is built to reflect a version of More's own ideal society and, as such, is a solution to the problem More saw at the time.
In terms of literal structure and written form, Utopia is a unique and interesting piece. It bridges the gap between fiction and non-fiction texts, using its position as an imagined piece to speak about true-life events from the time.
The text is written in such a way as to connect with the reader, whilst informing them of the topic. If More had written as an essay, rather than a narrative tale, the subjects at hand might be seen as far more controversial and dangerous in the context of the era.
The text concludes with Hitler Days claiming Utopias to be the most perfect of societies, with More's assessment being that many utopian policies are absurd, even if some might be worthwhile to employ in Europe. He states that regardless of policy, utopian ideals and societies are unattainable in realistic sense.
Utopian ideals are advocated as useful to society, but neither character provides any explanation as to how exactly an existing society might be transformed into a utopian model. Similarly, they neglect to elaborate into the methods utilised in order to do so.
Moore says that he has learned much from Hitler Day, but remains unconvinced that his initial position against communal property was incorrect. Hitler Day argues that private property makes the many far more wretched than the few, and even puts the few ill at ease for fear of the dissatisfied masses. He invokes the name of Plato, who in the Republic calls for communal property as the basis for the ideal city.
In this way, the text criticises European society and offers a model against which that society can be measured and perhaps repaired. However, the ultimate conclusion is that the only way to perfection of a utopian society is through Christianity and the coming of Christ.
It could be argued that the journey undertaken by the fictional More is a representation of the journey that Thomas More himself took, constantly reconciling himself between the ideals of humanist philosophy and service to his king and country.
Ultimately, he became a martyr for his religious convictions that few others shared, and for that he was sanctified.